look at the context API in SolidJS. Now, if you've ever worked with the context API in React, then you'll realize that it's very similar. But first, before we do that, what I want to do, just to show the different a different use case for the context API, I want to just split this app component up into different components. So we're going to make two components. We'll leave the header component, but then what we're going to do is we're going to create an input section and a book list section. So let's go into here, let's create a new folder, let's call it components. And then what we'll do, we'll create our first one, which can be the input section. And that's a JSX. And then we'll also create a new file, and that can be the book list. I'll give it a camel case. Okay, so how I would normally do this if I was working in a bigger code base, I would actually probably create a book list folder, a directory, and then in here I would have an index file with a JS, and then I would add that in and do it like this. So let's do that actually. Then we would export star from book list, and let's do the same for the input section. Put that in there, and we'll do a new file, which is an index file. And then we'll export for, star from input section. So this just allows us to add other things such as util functions, CSS, test files within this directory here, and then they're all together. So you may want to have something like an input section dot test, text dot test dot JS. You may want your input section dot CSS. So all these things could all live in here, and then you could just export out of the top the input section module here, and then it keeps everything together. Okay, let's carry on. So input section. So what's it going to do? It's just going to export the const of input section, okay, and then we go into here and we take this, we'll cut that out. I've done it in the wrong file, but there we are. Let's just cut that out, put that in there. Let's do, should have done a return. Okay, that was a bit messy, but there we are. So what do we need in here? So we need set new book, and we need add book to list. So we'll pass those in as props. And we also need new book, don't we? So we need new book and add book to list. Okay. I think that's everything. And then what we need to do is we need to import input section into here. So So we'll do input section, and there it is. And the props. So we're going to take in our new book. New book. Set new book. There we are. What was the last one? Add book to list. Okay. Add book to list. So now we've got our new component. We're passing in the props that it needs to render. We're bringing it in here through the import. And if we go back and just make sure with a quick refresh, everything is still working as normal. There we are. Great stuff. Okay, next piece. So now we're going to take out the book list. So go back into here. We'll do export const book list. We'll try not to be as messy this time. We'll do a return there, and then we'll go to app, and we'll take this, and we'll paste it into there. Okay, so we've got our UL, we've got our for. We need to import the for. We need to import toggle red book. We need to delete book. We also need the book list. Is that it? I think that might be it. We need to put const there. That's it. Now we've got everything looking good. So let's import our book list into here. And then we need all these. So we'll copy them, paste them here, and then we just need to finally the book list. Okay, let's have a look at our app. And it's still working. The hot reloading's working. 1984. Let's have a look. George Orwell. Add. Okay, that's great. No errors in the console. Happy with that. Great stuff. Okay. So as you can see, this is great. We're now sort of modularizing our UI. So now we know that if we have issues with input section or anything going on in book list, we can go in here. If we want to restyle them, we can style it once. If we want it to just be, want to reuse the book list component, we can reuse it anywhere. We can just add it in here at the bottom. So we can just do the same. and just go, yeah, we'll have that there. And now we've got 2 book lists with the same information in. So Cujo, Stephen King, and there we are, we've got our 2 lists. So as you can imagine, when you're building a big application, being able to strip out certain parts of the UI and create components from them is really helpful. So you have to look for these patterns, the patterns within your application, and decide which are the patterns that could be reused. So a list pattern could be reused. So we may rename it from book list to list component, and then the list, you could take a list of books or a list of to-dos or whatever, but it would always be styled the same. Okay, so this is great and it works well, but what we're doing here is we're adding all this information in from the bookstore, and we're doing it right here, and then we're passing these things down as props, and then accessing those props within the components themselves here, and that's how we're using them. Okay, but it could be nice if we were to just create a context. So at this level, just let me go back to that actually. So at this level where there's just sort of a couple of components and there's not a lot of nesting, the context is a little bit of overkill, and this is actually quite a nice pattern to be able to pass the props down through into the components, because at this level we can test. So we can create a test file and pass a mock-up of these props into the input section, and then we can test it. But as your application gets bigger and bigger, you might have 3, 4, 5 levels of nesting, maybe more, and you don't want to keep having to pass these props all the way down. So this is where the context comes in really helpful. So let's create a new folder. Let's call this contexts, and in here we'll create a new file, and this can be the book list context. So in here what we want to do is we want to create a context, and then once we've created the context, we'll create a wrapper, what we call a provider, that goes around the whole app, and then within the components we'll be able to access the context without having to pass the props in. So let's write the code and just see how that works. So we're going to take what we'll do is we'll do an initial state, which would be just an empty array for us. So it's going to be an empty array of books, and then we're going to create the book list context. So we'll create const book list context, and we'll make that equal to create context. And what we'll do is we'll pass in the initial state. So this will take as an argument the initial state, which is an empty array to begin with. Okay. So this is our context, but at the moment we can't use that. So now we're going to do export, and we're going to create what we usually call them providers. So I'm going to call it a provider. So it's a book list, and you can call it provider or context provider. The name is sort of up to you. And take some props. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to set up our state. So let's just use what we've used in here. So we won't delete this, but we'll just copy it across. So we'll take the create store. And we'll take all of these. So now we've got our provider, and now we're creating all the same things that we did before as functions. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, out of here, we're going to return the actual provider, which is the book list context provider, and that takes a value, and the value is all the methods that you want to pass through, or all the data that you want to pass through. So we exported all this last time, so let's use that. Okay, and then in here we're just gonna do props.children. So let's just go through this. So we're creating a context, then we're creating a provider that takes props, and this takes props. The props here that we're really after are just the children, because we're going to wrap the whole application, or the section of the application that you want this context to provide data for. In our case, it's going to be pretty much the whole application, but you can have certain areas of your application that are wrapped in a context provider, and just those will have access to the data. So we wrap that in. We've got our book list context provider with a value, and then we pass it so that any children, anything that this wraps, just gets passed back here. Now we're also going to just quickly do export const use book list. I think that'll be nice. Keep the naming consistent. And that's just gonna return use context. And we're going to pass in the book list context. So this means in any of our components, we can now use this use book list. We could call it create. A lot of the things in Solid use create, but I'm gonna use book list. I think I'll do it that way for now. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to wrap our application in this book list context provider. So we could wrap it at this level. I'm actually gonna wrap it here, right at the top. So I'm gonna put book list context provider. And I think I've named this wrong, so I need to name that with JSX. And there we are. That should fix that. I'll just restart. And there we have it. Okay, so now we've got our whole app wrapped. We're still using the old state, but it's working, so that's good. So now what we can do is, in our main app, we can remove this, and we can remove that, and we can remove this, and we can just have our main app, this component here. And what we can do is in each of these we can access the store. So let's go into the input section. So in the input section we need these, so we can take them out. We can do const, and then we can do use book list, and that will give us all those methods that we put on the context. And the same in our book list. So if we go to our book list, we want these, so we can just cut those from there. We can do const there, and then use book list. And what we should see now is that the app just stays exactly the same as it was before. So let's have a look. So let's do a quick reload. Seems okay. So let's try 1984 or 1970, 84 or whatever. 1984. And we'll do George Orwell. We'll add. And there it is. Spelt it wrong, so we'll remove it. We'll try it again. 1984, George Orwell. Yeah, Animal Farm. George Orwell. Add. I've read that one, read that at school. And there we are, all working. But now we're using the context API. We're passing in our methods from our context up here. And then we're passing through, we're accessing the context using this and passing it into our components. And that's the context API.